Rebellions and Revolutions. My name is Laurie Huggett-Wild. I'm the Head of History and Politics. History, Rebellions and Revolutions is one of the two history courses we offer, the other one being History, Democracy and Dictatorships, in addition to Ancient History and Politics, which are also offered within the History and Politics department. I'm going to start off with an overview of the particular course outline for this subject. You start off by studying Britain from 1930 to 1997 as one of your units. You'd also study the French Revolution and the rule of Napoleon from 1774 through to 1815, alongside civil rights in America from 1865 through to 1992, as well as a free choice of coursework in addition to all of that as well. In Unit 1, from 1930 to 1997, you study a range of different topics across this long period where Britain's role in international politics changes vastly, as does the internal structure of Britain as well, so in terms of its society. Some of the things you'd look at is you look at things such as Churchill's role in British politics, as well as his role as Prime Minister during World War II and how he conducts himself during that. In fact, Churchill is one of the key focuses in this particular unit. You also look at the reasons for conservative dominance in British politics. You look at Margaret Thatcher and why she dominates British politics so much during the 1980s. You look at the problems which Labour faced and therefore the UK faced in the 1960s and the 1970s. And you look at our decline as a foreign power from 1951 to 1997, how we go from this massive empire to a much different role in 1997. Alongside that, if you look at Unit 2 and the French Revolution and the role of Napoleon from 1774 through to 1815, you look at some key events such as the storming of the Bastille in 1789, the execution of Louis XVI and the ensuing terror after that. You look at Napoleon's invasion of Russia, and you look at the Battle of Trafalgar, amongst other things during this period. And then finally, you'd also look at Unit 3 and civil rights in America from 1865 through to 1992. You look at points such as the civil rights movement of the 1960s. You look at the response from southern USA after the Civil War. Look at the fight for equality from Native American groups. You'd also look at the rise of feminism in America as well. Alongside all of this, you'd have four choices from where you'd like to pick your coursework from. The Crusades, the Tudors, the background to the civil rights struggle in the USA, which is 19th century America, effectively, and you'd also have the choice of the Cold War as well. You'd pick one of these topic areas to write your coursework essay on, and you'd have complete free choice on any of those, although, of course, you would be supported by your teachers too in a production of that piece. If you chose to study this history, one of the things you would look at is the disagreements over the opening of a second front when you look at Britain from 1930 to 1997. At this point in history, the German advance has been halted at Stalingrad, at Al-Alamein, and they are being pushed back. And one of the big disagreements between the big three who you've got there of Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin is when a second front should be opened up by the British and the Americans during this period, because it's the Russians who are taking the blunt and the brunt of the casualties and are dealing mostly on the Eastern Front with the Germans. Whilst Britain and America are fighting in North Africa, they are more reticent about opening a second front in Western Europe via France than Stalin is. Stalin is obviously pushing for it, whilst they're more cautious about it, and eventually we have the Normandy invasions of D-Day, and this kind of demonstrates that the actions were already taking place in North Africa, and they were pushing upwards into southern Italy and taking the fight to the Axis power in that direction. But it was Stalin who wanted another front to be opened up in Western Europe sooner rather than later, when it was eventually opened up via D-Day. But of course, this is a particularly important point because it becomes a point of contention between the three great powers even after the war has ended. Stalin resents that this second front wasn't opened up sooner. So this is one of the many things you study in this period on this topic, as 1930 to 1997 is such a vast period of British history, such an important period of British history. You look at Britain changing fundamentally in the way it sees itself and changing how it acts on the international stage as it loses empire and finds a new role. Alongside that, if you studied this course, you'd look at the French Revolution and the rule of Napoleon. and a good example of some of the exciting and fascinating things you look at is the execution of Louis XVI. Louis XVI is the ruler of France. He's the absolute monarch, the king of France. He is seen to have been put there by God themselves. And Louis's family has ruled France, in fact, for approaching 800 years, or in fact over 800 years by this point. And he is an absolutely dominant king who is meant to be unchallenged at the beginning of his rule in 1774 and can do however he wants. We look at how he slowly but surely loses control due to financial issues, and how eventually this leads to massive events such as the storming of the Bastille, which you're seeing here, where angry French peasants and city workers rose up and stormed the Bastille, which is this massive fortification, or was this massive fortification in France. It's the equivalent of the Tower of London. Imagine the Tower of London being stormed and people taking it over because of their dislike for the monarchy, and that's what we see at this period. This builds up, and eventually this anger results in Louis XVI having his head chopped off via the guillotine. And we look at how that comes to be, how someone who is completely in control doesn't even just lose their throne, but in fact loses their head as well. And we also look at how this event then triggers a period of absolute violence in France, known as the Terror, as different groups seek vengeance on each other, and we have this complete period of chaos taking place in France, as you can kind of see a bit of caricature of on your screen as they descend into, and thousands are killed at the guillotine as different political groups fight each other, and chaos takes place across France. You look at this amongst a range of other things, both the build-up and how Napoleon restores order. You then look at how Napoleon is eventually defeated, and you look at how he changes France. A really fascinating period of French history, which is seen by many to represent the transition from medieval and medieval history to modern history, the French Revolution, a key turning point in history. Alongside that, you look at the civil rights movement from 1865 through to 1992. And one of the examples of the depth studies that you can look at, or you do look at, is the Black Panthers movement. The Black Panthers movement and the kind of the changing focus of the civil rights movement during the 1960s. After the initial successes of the campaigns by Martin Luther King and the groups which he worked with, which a lot of the successes were focusing on things such as legal and political equality. This changes groups, more radical groups such as the Black Panthers, protest that not enough has been achieved and further change is needed, and they're arguing that groups are being that groups such as politicians are dismissing these further concerns and feeling like enough has been done. And so you look at these Black Panther groups and the actions they take and how they are far more radical in what they're trying to do, and how they patrol the streets and how they try to achieve more radical and more significant change, both politically but also a far greater emphasis on social change and how not enough has been done. A really fascinating topic and something which is very relevant in the current state in America and in Britain, with the Black Lives movement protest taking place at the moment. These three units are all fascinating, ones which you can look at if you choose to study history, rebellions and revolutions at Godalming College. If you have any questions at all about any of this, then please do email me at lhw@godalming.ac.uk.